Let me start this video by simply stating, it can be hard to get new players that are only familiar with Dungeons & Dragons to try other systems. So let's discuss a little bit more about why you would even want to look at other systems, some reasons players may be reluctant to look at other systems, and some ways to help ease players into trying them. Dungeons & Dragons has usually been the champion system of tabletop RPGs, except for a period in the 90s, near the end of 2nd edition, when it started to fall behind a few other notable systems for a brief period of time. Over the years, I have played, I don't even know how many systems I've played. One day I'll actually sit down and list all of the ones out. But even before that brief period when Dungeons & Dragons wasn't the be-all, end-all system that everyone was using, getting people to try new systems has always been a daunting task. In the 90s and early 2000s, trying a new system could mean a lot of work. The wave of streamlined and well-tested games hadn't yet begun, and complexity was often the name of the game. Systems, subsystems, full-on spreadsheets and charts for flows and choices and skill trees, all of these things. We played RPGs where it easily took us an entire session just to make a character. So learning a new system has since become easier as the trend of more streamlined games have become the norm. Out of the systems I like to run these days, Dungeons & Dragons actually turns out to be one of the more complex RPG systems compared to something like Fate, Tales from the Loop, or to a degree even Cypher. So when I see players that are reluctant to try new systems because, I don't want to learn a whole new system, let's just use Dungeons & Dragons for insert cool idea here. Now don't get me wrong, I do love the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. There is a reason D&D has seen better days than it ever has before. From testing the rules, to making sure they, for the most part, make sense, to not flooding us with too many new rules just so they could sell us as many books as possible. Pathfinder. It's in a good place. I also think if I really had to, I could rework and reflavor the system to run just about any story I wanted to tell. However, that's like saying I'm going to retool this crowbar to act like just about any tool that I need. Oh, sure, it could be done with enough work, but maybe an actual screwdriver would be a better screwdriver than that crowbar. It's the same thing with game systems. D&D has a focus, and I'm not talking about the setting. Dungeons & Dragons rules are 99% about measured and crunchy combat situations, which can be great. Sometimes you just want to chuck dice and kill shit using a predetermined list of abilities and a build. And I'm not saying that's the only way to play. Obviously, I have played many games with exploration, RP-heavy groups. I have a whole video about pillars of play and everything like that. But when you look at the static rules of Dungeons & Dragons, it's mostly all about measured and crunchy combat. But what if you want a different style of play altogether? That's where the other systems can be important. Fate is all about mutual creativity. It's extremely loose on the rules, and the players almost have as much say over the flow of the story as the GM. I mean, part of character creation is literally making up your abilities from scratch creatively. Cypher is about discovery, exploration, and a new freshness that happens every time you play, and its rules support this. It is also an absolute dream of a system to run from the Game Master's perspective. It requires very little prep time, and allowing you to make up stats and situations on the fly with crazy levels of efficiency. It leaves all the roles and mechanics really in the hands of the players so that the Game Master can focus on the important bits of the story and exploration. Tales from the Loop handles all situations in much the same way. There's no combat mode to break the flow of the narrative. There's no roll initiative, and it's a rule your characters can't even die in the game. It's not written for that. It's written to solve supernatural mysteries as children in the style of 80s kids on bikes movies like The Goonies or E.T. Different systems provide a vastly different experience. They also provide unique rules to add to your toolbox. There are numerous rules that I have taken from other games and surgically moved over to the ones that I wanted. An example of this is a rule, I think it was from the Cypher setting The Stars Are Fire. It's something called Redline Mode. One player pays to enable Redline Mode for everyone else in the rest of the conflict. While redline mode is active, a player can call out that their action is utilizing it, which makes the action easier, but increases the chance for the GM to use a free intrusion by a fair amount. I love this idea so much, I used it in other systems like Fate. I believe my players used it in my Secrets of Cats game a couple of times. This is why I think it's important to try out other systems. It gives you more tools in your toolbox as both a GM and a player. So why do so many players balk at the idea of trying a new system apart from Dungeons & Dragons? Well, that one's pretty easy. Once someone is comfortable with something, the majority of people just don't like change. Being new at something often involves an awkward stage where it's like breaking in a new pair of shoes. It's not as comfortable as your old runners, even though you know it'll eventually get there once you get used to them, and it might be more suitable for what you're currently doing. I also think there's a second category of players that's had a friend say, "Hey, check out this system," and then inundates them with all the rules at once, completely overwhelming them. In the end, I think we need to look at introducing players to other RPG systems the way we would video games. The amount of people that play only one video game and never branch out is pretty rare. Yeah, it happens, but it's rare. You could mod the hell out of Minecraft to play it just about any way you want, and never play anything but Minecraft, but you'll still probably occasionally play something different. So why stick with only one RPG system despite the fact that you could modify it as you please, just like you would Minecraft? Secondly, when introducing players to a new RPG system, it may not be a bad idea to follow similar guidelines to making a good tutorial in a video game. Don't flood them with walls of text. Introduce aspects of the game one section at a time, and try not to interrupt the actual flow of the game just to teach them the mechanic. Although not everyone may agree with me, I, and some of the other GMs I've recently talked to for this video, think that running a short game with pre-generated characters is a great way to achieve this. Making a character in an RPG system often makes a player feel like they need to know the whole system when making choices so they can maximize how much fun they can have with it. Not necessarily for min-maxing purposes, just so that they know they'll get the toys to play with that would be awesome. So by delving into character creation right away, a player feels at a loss if they don't know the entire system. And suddenly delving into the entire system is meant more for masochists like me that enjoy running the game and making a smooth experience. If you just want to introduce a player to the game, suddenly getting overwhelmed with the entire system is a bit much and gives them that "I'm going to quit now" moment. So you've started. You have pre-gens, and now what? Introduce them to the system one step at a time. Maybe start in medias res, aka in the middle of the action. Most RPGs have a set of systems in place for action sequences or conflicts. Begin with a few basic roles to start with the mechanics and learn the character's abilities. Make it flow as part of the story. Now, split the rest of the game up depending on what subsystems or parts the RPG has. Does it have a social system? Do that. A crafting system? Maybe tinker with that one next, but only do one of these at a time. Only focus on one aspect of the game, and try to leave a little bit of time after you try it to allow them to process what they've learned before moving on. If you do this right, it'll be an invisible tutorial. Players won't realize you're not just telling a story. You're doing this to teach them the game. Once again, let's look at this from a video game aspect. I recently tried to play Final Fantasy XV for the first time, and the tutorial was a nightmare. Halting gameplay, broken up by walls of text that made my eyes feel like they were glazing over. In the end, it doesn't actually teach you everything you need to know for the game. It was just a halting process that stopped every 2 seconds to explain things and over. Ugh. It's not the worst tutorial I've come across, but it was enough I uninstalled the game and said, maybe I'll give it another try someday. We'll see. But now, you look at games like Portal and Portal 2. The tutorials are so subtle and so mixed with the storyline and fun gameplay, you don't fully realize you're in the tutorial or when it begins or ends. The skills you learn are split up, but intermixed with actual gameplay over the course of the game, such that you never feel overwhelmed by any of the new information about a new mechanic. This is how you could introduce a new player to a system. Take it in bites. Try one new thing at a time. allow time to process it, and move on. I'm kind of doing this with my current Numenera game, which uses the Cypher system. Although we have done a Cypher system game before, it was a little bit of a whirlwind game and I feel like we didn't fully embrace everything we could. So this time around, I'm taking it in chunks. Plus I have some new players to it. The first session was entirely focused on a conflict intermixed with a little bit of RP afterwards in order to give them that time to process. The second session was more about the exploration and salvaging bits. Then they got to experience that and then do some roleplay afterwards to give them time to process. Numenera has other subsystems like crafting and settlement management that we'll get it to in the future, but for the next couple of sessions we're going to revisit the conflict, exploration, and salvage aspects of the game so they don't feel overwhelmed. I'm incorporating it as part of the storyline so they don't fully realize that I'm just doing this to get them into a tutorial, so to speak. We take it in bites as part of the actual gameplay, and players won't even know they're basically playing in a tutorial I designed to get them comfortable with the game. So, in conclusion, the best way to introduce players to a new system are, don't overwhelm them with the rules. Let them know the benefits the system has to offer. Don't make it sound like that system is better than the one they already know, it's just different. And most importantly, watch my videos! I don't feel like I've covered everything I needed to say. The wintry hellscape snowpocalypse that's happening around me has made it difficult for me to get this video out, in between shoveling snow and screaming at the sky gods for the accursed white stuff of evil. So let me know in the comments below your own thoughts on the subject. Maybe some other tips for getting new players interested in a new system, and why would you even want to get them into it in the first place? Thanks for watching. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a good one, eh?